So I have to talk about benchmarking. Obviously, benchmarking, two components of benchmarking. One is, and the most important one, is just benchmarking yourself. So it's just keeping your records, knowing what you're doing, measuring your performance, and having enough of those measures in place, whether it's kilograms per millimetre or kilograms per DSC or whatever it is. Looking at your performance and looking at how you can improve it over time, and challenging yourself to do it better. And that's the first key part of the benchmark. It's the most important part of benchmark. The second part of it is then looking at what everyone else is doing. And as you'd be aware, having been involved, if you're having benchmarking services, that's a little bit more tricky. So we've come up with a process where we do that. The screen's probably going to be a little bit far away for this, and your numbers will be very small in your printout. But don't worry too much about the numbers, we'll get the concept right. So we'll start with why you might benchmark. We'll start with machinery. For any of you cropping guys, you'll be, machinery will be dear to your heart. Why benchmark what you do with cropping machinery? Why would you want to have a benchmark to do with cropping machinery? Anyone? No?
Return on asset.
Sorry?
Return on asset.
Return on asset? Yep. Probably most of you don't want actually benchmark on cropping machinery because you just want to buy whatever you want to buy. But the problem with this is, of course, unless I'm mistaken, and if any of you can sort of tell me in the room I'm wrong, but there is never going to be enough money to buy every bit of toy that you really want to have, right? So no one's really going to put the brakes on you. If you want to go and do it, you can go and do it. Until the bank actually says no, there's no one putting any benchmarks on you. So maybe a good place to start is to have a bit of an idea what industry benchmarks might be for investment in machinery. So here's a little list. Now this is low and medium rainfall zone. The high rainfall zone average investment in cropping plants, so this is cropping machinery on cropping hectares, is high rainfall zone is actually 461 or 63 a hectare. So our first port of call is just an investment in machinery per hectare. Okay. Now that's actually reasonably dangerous in its own right, in that if you're invested in specialised machinery like hay equipment and you run a large hay operation, then your cost per hectare will look very high, and your consultant comes along and say, "Oh mate, you're way overcapitalised here." So you've got to look at it in terms of income. If you're producing more income and you've got a higher investment, another measure we have is less than 90% of income. In actual fact, in the high rainfall zone, the average investment in machinery in relation to income is only 62 or 63%. So which means if you've got $1 million in turnover, $630,000 worth of gear. That's a realm. Okay. The other ones we like to do, we don't like to see repayments into the future greater than 10% of your turnover. Okay. So for most of you that would be quite high probably. On the average in our client base, it's just over 8% of their turnover is in future repayments. You just don't know what's coming up. So the fact that you can go and buy it and fund it, and interest rates are really cheap at the moment, is awesome. But maybe you should have some parameters about how much you let yourself line up for repayments. The other one is we tend to work on the repayments around about 10% of machinery value. So if you've got $1 million worth of plant, you're going to have to spend $100,000 a year just to keep it where it is. That's regardless of what you do, you're going to have to do that. If you're growing your business, you're going to have to spend more than that because you're going to have to increase the scale of your plant, most likely. So they're just some benchmarks for machinery replacement. Okay. All right, this is what FARMANCO calls profit series. Now, I won't be able to see the numbers there. But what we do, it's a book. Book here, it's got 120 odd pages in it with about 70 graphs. Okay? So, because you can't see it very clearly, I'll have to point it out, but there's a couple of different things about this graph. Number one, there's different colours. So that actually showed up really good the other day on a small screen. It doesn't show up very well there at all. But there's three colours of all those numbers, right? There's red, blue and green. Red's low rainfall, green's medium rainfall, and blue's high rainfall. Okay? So while you get all the numbers on the graph together, you can sort of identify your rainfall zone. A lot of our clients got farms over a couple of rainfall zones, or they like to keep an eye on what's happening at the rainfall zones. So it's good to get a wider perspective. Now, all these dots are actually all numbers. So in our benchmarking series each year, like here's number 1 here. Number 1 is the farm business that's produced the highest average return on capital over that 5-year period. So if you're ranked number 1, you have the highest average return on capital. If you're ranked at 287, you're the lowest. Probably not a good place to be, but it's important to know that you're there. Rightio. So it's also a ranking service. Rightio. So which is I think it's valuable. You know, you look at here and you can say, well, number 1, he hasn't got he's not got the cheapest investment machinery. He's a bit below the average. He's certainly not got the most investment machinery. But there's a whole lot of different factors that might feed into that. It's only one graph out of 60. The other thing that you might not be able to pick up from back there is that some of these have a square around them. So numbers with a square around it means that you're in the top 25% in that zone. Okay. Now, if you would have a guess, you probably can't really tell from there, but what proportion of the top 25% would be in the low rainfall zone? Low rainfall, they don't do very well, do they? It's how they run it. So, in actual fact, in our profit series, we've got 25% of the sample size is low rainfall, 50% is medium rainfall, 25% is high rainfall. And the distribution of the top performing farms in the top 25%, which is 75 out of 72 out of 287, is equally spread across all those zones. 15 years ago, I had a period just before we started doing this service where a local benchmarking service had the lower rainfall zone having the highest return on capital. And so there's this sort of belief that the low rainfall zone was to have the highest return on capital. And we haven't seen that in our survey in this last 12 years. So which in itself is interesting, because if you start to do benchmarking stuff, you go, oh, it's all right for you because you fellas don't pay anything for land out there, so you can make a bloody good return every year. But in actual fact, there's just many guys making a good return on capital in the high rainfall zone as there is in the low rainfall zone. So it's about the management as much as it is about the land. Okay. So this is a crop machinery one. There's dollars per hectare invested in crop machinery. Average through there is something between high rainfall zone at 500 to low rainfall zone at 300. But 12,000 hectares is second card for the day. Obviously with this graph's got trim in there's a half dozen businesses which are significantly larger than 12,000 hectares, but obviously we can't put them on the graph because they're making this tiny little dot in the corner. But the range is huge. The thing you can pick from this is, say if you're number, let's see, 49 here, right? You can calculate the difference between 49 and 43 is 1, 2, 3, 4, 500 bucks a hectare more invested in machinery. Okay? So on 1,000 hectares, we're talking $500,000. So on 4,000 hectare property, it's $2 million difference in plant investment. So not saying that down here is the best spot. My instinct is you want to be slightly above the average so you've got better capacity and ability to expand when you need to. So that's just my own personal feeling. Some guys have a very low cost strategy. Some guys really don't mind what they spend. But if you calculate that there's sort of $1.5 million difference between the average and yourself, maybe that investment might be better off in a unit in Sydney than a depreciating farm machinery asset over time. Obviously, there's other factors that affect that, but it's just a way it allows you to go, well, here's all the people in 4,000 hectares, and this is what their investment is compared to mine. Okay, so it gives you a pretty good feel for where people sit. Rightio. From that seeding efficiency, or the seeding harvest burn spraying efficiency stuff we did earlier on, last year we put this graph in for the first time. So basically what we said, we took the size of the machine, the width of the machine and the number of hours, width of the machine, and then the average speed. And then we said, look, if you operated that for 24 hours at your efficiency level, which might be 71%, this is how long it would take you to finish the seeding program. So it's just a way to give everyone a relative view of how many days, on average, you guys take to finish that program. And number one, out here on the end, takes 28 days to do his program. He's probably going to look at this graph and go, I'm a little bit exposed. I might be performing really well, but if something goes wrong on the main tractor, I've got a problem. I'm sitting right on the edge of what I could possibly do in my window. Now, it might not all be about the fastest seeding window, of course. You've got areas where guys have got frost, they want to slow down the seeding program, they don't want to be the fastest. But it's just one of those big picture views of capacity. Where do I sit in the mob as far as capacity goes? We found this with the boom spray capacity as well. I was fortunate in some ways. I had a group of clients in grass patch. They all farm very close together. They're all good neighbours and good friends, very competitive little buggers as well. They decided they were all going off to South Australia to go on the river boats together for a week and a half about 5 years ago. Because of that, I do this on the 15th of February, because of that I had to do the business reviews before they all went on the houseboats. So I had to do all the reviews very closely together. And when you're doing lots of reviews, this all over the place, sometimes you don't get perspective, but when you do them all at the same time, it's very interesting. One of the guys, they had very, very good yield performance. They were nearly 400 kilos higher on a 1.9 tonne average than his four neighbours. Okay, and I'm just going, this doesn't make sense, you know. Sure, he's good, but he hasn't got any better land than anyone else. They're all in bloody exactly the same place. 2 years before, when his son came home, I said, oh, well, you probably need to get buying some more land. He said, yep, Derek, yep, I think you're right. Didn't pay any attention to me whatsoever. He bought a second boom spray. And him and his son can smoke that place in 2.5 days. And that was the biggest impact over those 2 years in difference between the yield on those 5 properties. There was 0.4 of a tonne, 20% higher yielding in those properties because his capacity of boom spray was so large. Right, now he had to spray summers, one of the summers he had to spray twice, we had to spray once, because he didn't get the program for rain again. And they go, you have to go do it again. Another 400 kilos, thanks. So capacity is a really big issue in the business we're in. One of those fellas is running a 7,000 hectare program with 120 foot boom spray. And I'll tell him, mate, you've got the most efficient boom spray in the country. That's awesome. How do you do that? He got 2 drivers himself and someone else. They would just runs all the time. But his performance was never really good. You know, his agronomists have always been complaining that it took him so long to get back onto what he said he had to do last time, that wasn't happening. So we all got together, sat down and had a look at it. And it was just this capacity thing. Since then, those 4 neighbours have all gone and bought second-hand SP boom sprays to compensate, to go along with their brown rigs. So they couldn't have justified buying big new ones, but they've gone second-hand SPs, and their performance is significantly improved. So we're in a business that's about capacity. So it's
I think also, and also time, not going to everything in time amount.
Absolutely, yeah. So if you're pushed to a 120 foot boom doing a 7,000 hectare program, you know, you're on the edge of your delta, well, you're still going because you can't afford not to go, right? So you're just not getting the efficiency, you're not getting the efficacy right. It's just not working for you. So, and these guys now look back and go, why the hell did we ever think we could operate without 2 boom sprays? Just can't imagine it possibly happening. So it sounds really overcapitalised, but on 6,000 hectares, another 250 grand for a second-hand SP, the capacity is, per hectare is very, very cheap to buy that extra 31 kilos. Okay, so the process I go through with my clients is basically, they're all used to this by now. They get an electric form, comes out at the start of harvest, and any time they get around to it between that and our review time, they fill it out, shoot it back in. The first time they get it, they have a heart attack, they go, oh shit, you don't want all this information. Then they know what I'm looking for, it's fine. I've trained them a couple of years, they're great. They take a bit of pride in getting this done. And if they're a little bit tardy to do it, I'll tell them the neighbours are so much better at doing it than they are, and they get a bit better at it. So the data all comes in here. Now we spend a day sitting down, generally on farm. Some guys like to come to the office, but most guys like to do it on the farm. And we sit down and we pull those numbers together, analyse last year's performance, look at all the enterprise performance, do the efficiency benchmarking, and that's basically what we do on an annual basis. As a result, filling out all that stuff, you automatically got the benchmarking stuff. It's all exactly the same format, every business is measured the same way, so the benchmarking stuff just falls out of it. So it's pretty efficient like that. Obviously machinery plans, succession planning is a pretty important part of what we do. We have an annual written report. It's electronic and hard copy. And so obviously electronic, you can shoot it onto your bank, or some people don't want hard copies anymore because they've gone digital office. And we're a bit anal about security, so we have password protected PDF files on all that stuff. So that's a review process. Review costs between $4 and $6 grand. I was told by a lady on the way up here this morning from the government, something that was, over here, lots of money gets thrown at agriculture for all sorts of stuff, right? So if you're in WA, you have to pay for this yourself, but over here, she says, you call the business plan, they'll pay half the cost, which I thought was almost too good to be true, but anyway, something we'll look at. So that's basically the cost of your review plan. Be part of the benchmarking service, you basically buy them subscription basis, a couple $100. The more organised you are, the less time it takes, the less it costs you. And it depends obviously what else you're looking at. That's just for the day spent and analysis of the work. But obviously most guys like to catch up during the year and when they've got things on the go. So they just pay for it on a time basis. Rightio, so more graphs. So this one here is the net debt to income ratio, net debt to income and net equity ratio graph. So you've got equity on the bottom, there's 70%, there's my 75%, here's the crosshairs, 75%. Debt to income ratio 1.2 to 1. So that's basically a standard industry benchmark. You don't want to have more debt than 1.2 times your income. You've got $1 million of income, you don't want more debt than about 1.2 mil. Okay? It's a very rough rule of thumb, obviously, and there's plenty of guys above it. The vast majority of clients in here are in this box, and 24% of our clients are net debt to income, net debt of 0. So, if you're going to be out this box here, your debt to income is significantly larger, your debt's significantly larger than your income, and your equity's low. There's not too many numbers out here with a box around it. So here's one, number 54. Here's one right out here, number 4. But most of those numbers don't have a box around, so not in the top 25%. It's an area where they're compromising their productivity because of their gearing. It's number 4 here, it's a bit unusual, but they own 7,000 acres and at least 35,000 acres. They make it a pretty interesting business to run. Good years are awesome and tough years are pretty tough. So these are the sort of fellas that have a very, very good working relationship with the bank. When things are good, you get the bank comes out, put on lunch, it's great, get the whole family around, have a good time, have a few beers, it's all good. And when it gets tough, they remember the good times. And the other thing with this, of course, you don't really want to share this number with your neighbour, right? I've got a couple of fairly competitive fellas in Esperance, and they always share the numbers over the back fence. And it's great, but they know the risk. But it basically means that whoever picks up the book, they know your number, they know everything about your business. So obviously in a competitive environment, that's not exactly what you're after, but the files are all password protected and the numbers, you're the only one who knows your number. So that's it's pretty important sometimes just to see where you are. This I found really valuable with a client about 3 years ago. Took over this place I talked about called Livestock. It's had 3 awesome years in a row. 3 years ago, just before harvest, we took out this client out there, and they came in on this graph. Well, I spent time and said, "What do you want to do?" "Oh, we want to grow." So, why am I here? Well, our consultant's very negative, and he doesn't, he can't see we're going to go anywhere. I said, "Oh, that's very disappointing. Terrible, negative consultant. It'd be horrible." And then he showed me his numbers. I went, "Holy shit!" He was back here 37% equity. And I'm just going, I can see why your consultant's a bit conservative, a bit negative. They said, we've got debt. Everyone's got debt. All farmers got debt. We're all struggling. We're all finding it hard. And I pulled the graph out and said, okay, I have no idea what their position was in relation to the rest of the world. Okay? So I sat down, it's just before harvest. They were clearly looking at a really good harvest. And I said, well, you guys have a really good think as a family. So after harvest, you've got to sort out whether you actually want to continue doing this or you want to get out.
That was 224. Oh, sorry.
That's all right.
Well, that was 224. What you were top right answer.
224. 234.
Looks like 24.
Well, he's got 85% equity, but he's got a very high debt to income. So I'd say he's got some sort of contracting type of business or something like that that's generating a lot more income than you're able to handle that level of debt. His rank is not flash, you know, he's in the bottom quartile.
He's got a bit
But he's got a bit of equity, doesn't necessarily mean anything, does it? So,
it's an expensive operation.
yeah. Of course, the Livestock fellow is very, very happy now. It's because in the last 3 years, not only was he just about to go broke, because I told him he's bought another farm, he's got nearly 85% equity. So, sometimes in agriculture, funny things happen. Right. Here's another one that clients like a fair bit, right? It's got cropping percentage along the bottom. So this is the sheep versus crop banter, right? There's a bit of this going on, cattle versus crop. So this crop percentage along the bottom. So if you're at 100% crop, obviously, if you're anything about above 95, because we don't include fallow or brown manure as a crop technically. So basically above 95%, you're 100% crop. Okay. Who's making the most money? The croppers or the livestock fellas?
What do you call livestock? You call it mixed farming.
Yep, mixed farming. I reckon mixed farming is most of it, isn't it? It's all these guys here. 70%, 60, 50 to 80% crop. Now, all the cropping guys look straight at this chart and go, look, we're making all the money, the livestock fellas don't know what they're doing, right? So very conveniently don't look at how many numbers there are jammed in this making no money part of the 100% cropping zone, rightio? Just comes back to management, how well you do it. So I'm still making a positive return on capital, but there's a big bunch in here that aren't in this sort of bracket up here. But you come back in the livestock zone, there's plenty of guys top of those square boxes, the top 25%, number one. Number two, there's plenty of guys in the livestock mixed farming thing that are doing it all right as well. So I think for me 10 years ago, it was all about crop versus sheep. You know, people were getting out of sheep. The whole crop versus sheep thing. It's actually got nothing to do with that. It's, you know, what you like doing, how well you do it, recognising there's differences in profitability between them at times and how to take advantage of that by messing around with the enterprise mix a little bit. But it doesn't really matter what system you choose, you can be profitable at it, it's just how well you do it. Of course, if I was talking to a cropping fellow, I'd say, yeah, you know, you fellas are kicking it, that's great. And the livestock fellas like that are completely different sort of okay. Rightio. Who's had much discussion? Who's been involved in grain and graze? Anyone? Yeah, grain and graze? Or a discussion about calves per hectare versus calving percentage? Much discussion about that? No? So the new age thing is to go to this calves per hectare and lambs per hectare. We'll have a look at that as well. Rightio? No, not so much, but it's both a problem, yeah. So really what it's saying is it doesn't matter how good your calving percentage is, if your stocking rate's nothing or you're not producing many calves, you might have the best calving percentage. So this one graph, so we tend to look at calves per hectare. There's not, as you can see, there's only about 10% of the clients in the West Australian wheat belt who have cattle operations. So it's a relatively lower component. This doesn't include pastoral guys in this cropping series. So obviously this weaning per hectare is pretty important. So I've done one for sheep. This is gross margins. Upper left here I've got gross margin per hectare and lambs wean per hectare. Now, you know, it's a pretty good. I tend not to use gross margin too much. I tend to like net margin because gross margin really makes everything look a lot better than it is. It's when you put all your overhead costs in that you've then got to have a little closer look at it. But there's obviously some guys looking at some pretty good lands per hectare type numbers, 4, 5s and 6s. Obviously it's affected by your rainfall zone. And generally there's more red numbers at the bottom here and there's more blue numbers at the top. But it's quite a big mix, which just comes back to performance. On that lambing percentage, I've just pulled this graph out last night. Sorry I haven't got numbers on it, but what I've done is the weaning percentage along the bottom and the lands per hectare up the side. Okay, just to make this point, you know, would you prefer to be here 130% lambing percentage, 5 lambs per hectare, or would you prefer to be at 98% lambing and 6 lambs per hectare? So that's the whole thing about it. A lot of guys, particularly the traditional sheep guys who one of their major measures is breeding performance, what's my lambing percentage like, or winning percentage like. So I don't like this thing per hectare thing, but it obviously makes a fair bit of sense. The profitability of this enterprise is driven by how well you manage your stocking rate. And you know, you can have a fella back here who's only going 78% lambing and go, oh, she's not much good. You know, I'll tell you what, just kicking out 5.25 lambs per hectare. You know, that's all right. So he's running a bit harder, he's prepared to wear some more losses, but he's actually making more money than this fella over here, 130% lamb, is only doing 1 lamb per hectare. Now obviously it's affected by rainfall zone and those things as well, but it's just demonstrating that point. Grain and graze guys have been really keen on the last little while. Just finish off on some typical grain graphs. So this is wheat yield on a 5-year average, kilograms per millimetre. So this is growing season rainfall. So again, it's rainfall April to October, adding summer rainfall, less evaporation, take off any October rain that's no use. And it's just giving you a chance to look at, on 5 years, if you've averaged 275 mils, here's the range from the fellow who's done the most on that rainfall to the fellow who's done the least. So if you're sitting somewhere in the middle here, you can identify maybe what your potential is, and you can go hard and work out what those differences are. Now, the other thing you've got to be mindful of, most farmers are and most other people aren't, is that yield doesn't necessarily make the most money. Okay? So we've got a fella here, he's ranked 188 in the profit series, 275 mils of rainfall, growing 3.4 tonne. But you've got fellas that are ranked, maybe not so high. Here's 11, number 11. He's only got a 2.5 tonne average, so he's a fair way behind this fella here, but he's actually making significantly more profit. So it's not all, you know, in terms of business, it's not all about the highest yield that makes the most money. Where's 1 on there? Can anyone see number 1? 2 tonne, 190? In here somewhere?
Just up.
Oh yes, there he is there. So it's only 2 tonne. So I mean, you'd expect to see him on this graph, 2 tonne, wouldn't you? Because he's number 1. The business is worth a whole lot more about everything else you manage and how well you manage the rest of the business. He'd be looking at that going, well, I'm not doing very bloody well, am I? What's my gap? What can I improve? On a 5-year average, he'd be thinking he wants to be a bit higher than that. So from a competitive factor, he's got an opportunity to identify what the gap is and sit down and sort out what else he's got to improve. Pretty exciting for him. Yep, but there's plenty of people on that. So, well, there's people that have done better. Maybe he's on the top of all the guys in that rainfall zone. Maybe it's as good as he can get. Weak variable cost per tonne, so we'll also look at the cost part of that because we go through now enterprise and cost to enterprises. It's easy to pull out this stuff here. So this one here, there's no scale on the bottom. You've got cost per hectare up the side. All the red guys, it's low rainfall here. All the guys with the boxes are here. And so you get a feel for the top 25% spend more, less, about the same as average. Okay? And then you can get that same perspective for each of the zones. To me, it's probably not as obvious in the low rainfall zone because they all don't spend much. Right? But it's more obvious in the high rainfall zone. Now the other trick you've got here is I could do this per hectare, but I've done it per tonne. So the guys in the top 25% here have been pretty profitable, are growing more tonnes, so that the variable cost per tonne, if they manage their costs, can be quite low. So generally you'd see that that'll be the case. So it just gives you a chance to sort out exactly where you fit and what the gaps are. So it's a pretty good opportunity, I think, for your business. The last slide I've got here, we've got cash and bank price equivalent. Now remember this is a WA graph, right? So it's a pre-install graph, so you have to take that $40 a tonne off to get it to port for your normal price. So 310 means 270, 300 means 260. Okay. So this graph, it's got gross margin on the left. Just ignore that, because most guys do ignore that. They just want to know has their pricing strategy worked better than their neighbour? So they want to know that they've up this end of the graph and they've avoided this end of the graph. We've got a great marketing team, 4 guys in that team, and their job is to work with these guys to set out a strategy and give them a call and say, well, you said when you got this point, we're going to do this. How are we going? Are you going to pull the trigger, yes or no? So it's part of the strategy, and our grain marketing team really want to know what this is, because they don't want to discover that they've worked all year to not get a better price than the average of their clients. And we want to tell them that too. Okay. So that's it on the benchmarking stuff. It's what we haven't got is obviously benchmarking here in the east. So I'm new, you're an own person here. It's going to take me a while to get 300 clients, and certainly got to do it themselves. So we've got a really good basis in the background. But it's before I moved to the east, we've been planning over the last year has been to have a completely separate benchmarking service with Ryland Broadacre. But the numbers actually are also similar. So I don't think we'll change it. We'll show this eastern ones separately and build them into that until we can decide something different about it. But from what I've seen so far, it actually all the principles are exactly the same.
I've just got one question in relation to your benchmarking options. Talk more about benchmarking against others versus benchmarking against yourself, and the benefit of benchmarking into your own operation.
I think it's really important. The first step is always benchmarking yourself. So that's a perspective of good data for yourself through it. And that's the first benchmark. I think it's dangerous just to do that and not look outside yourself to see what the range is, obviously. That makes sense, have a look at that. But most guys, in my experience, if you don't draw a line and say, I'm going to be at the operation on the bloody 15th of February, we're going to pull all this stuff together, you don't have to really actually keep a lot of that data very long, and our memories actually aren't very good at a lot of stuff. So we measure a lot of stuff, and at first people go, oh shit, what are we doing that for? But over time, you get to say, okay, well, this actually says I'm not doing very well at pricing the grain. It wasn't just a one-off, and I can explain it. I'm actually not doing very well at it. I need some help, or I need some strategies. So, the benchmarking your own stuff is really good, but then the next step, I guess, is looking a bit wider out.